Welcome back, troglodytes, to a historic episode of the Trogly's Guitar Show. What is this beast? It is a piece of Gibson history. That's what it is. It might look ugly, it might look unconventional, but there's so much more that meets the eye to this one. So let's dig in. This is an experimental prototype from Gibson from 1992. It's eventually what became this model, the double cut standard that was introduced in 1998. 1 year before that, there was also one called the DC Pro from the new custom shop. It had a freaky headstock, but it also had binding and a few other unique features. But this is the model that kind of helped birth those. So to paint the story here, these were being developed by Gibson to compete with PRS. They wanted to destroy PRS with this design. Yeah, I could kind of see why they didn't go with this one, but it's really fun to think about this because being born in 1992, it's kind of an interesting time period for Gibson. Besides PRS, being in the making for about 7 years now, they were experiencing success with their Les Paul Classic lineup at this time. So much success that unscrupulous dealers were just swapping the truss rod covers and selling them as reissues. So it's kind of like a learning period from the new era of Gibson, the Henry J era. So wanting to stay on top of things, they were trying to design something to compete with a new competitor. So this is the brainchild of custom shop employee J.T. Ribeloff. He was first hired in 1987, once again lining up with the new ownership of Gibson to develop brand new designs for Gibson. His first project was developing a synth guitar. But let's dive into what this thing is. Alright, so first off, this doesn't actually say Les Paul on the headstock, but I think we can all agree it's very Les Paul-like. This might be the first chambered Les Paul ever made. Now, I'm not 100% sure on that because there's probably other prototypes or a model I'm forgetting here, but the earliest chambered out Les Paul was the Bantam series, but that was kind of like mid-90s. Because this is one super lightweight guitar. It only has wood underneath the bridge and tailpiece. Everything else is chambered out. It makes this thing ridiculously neck heavy, but it's super comfortable to play sitting down. But pickup wise here, we have a Firebird styled mini humbucker and a humbucker. But notice, no pole pieces. That kind of gives it a futuristic design here. We've got a regular bridge and tailpiece setup here, but look at this control layout. It's very forward-thinking and modern. However, it is not unique for this model. This layout came from the Gibson M3. Now, if you don't know what those do in the M3 or you don't know the history of the M3, definitely check out this video. Those are some of the nicest playing Gibson guitars you can ever find. But you got a master volume and a master tone, and then you've got two switches here. Now, it's just a layout that's the same from the M3. It doesn't do the same stuff. This only has a 3-way toggle switch because, well, we don't have a third pickup, right? So you've got neck position, you've got both of them, and then you got the bridge. And now you got this guy. So you're probably thinking, oh, that's probably just a coil split or something like that. Well, it's actually a 3-way toggle switch here. So you've got a down position, a middle, and an up position. This can function as a kill switch. It can function as in and out of phase, and it can also do coil splitting. So you've got a multitude of sounds with this layout. You've got interesting pickup combination. You've got a traditional bridge tailpiece. You've got chambering with a maple top and a mahogany back. But let's take a look at this cutaway here. It's not like the traditional 50s double cut juniors and standards. It's got this completely flat edge and then just kind of spikes up like a shoulder on both of them. This is just really kind of a freaky design. I mean, look at this. And on top of that, you have binding around the body, similar to what the DC Pro eventually ended up having, but the standards did not get when they were first introduced. Kind of an interesting feature is the wide binding here to cover up the maple top. Furthermore, this one has an ebony fretboard with the trapezoid inlays. The ebony fretboard makes all the difference to this thing. It feels great to play. I love that feature. But the headstock is a little bit plain here. You don't have anything on it besides a Gibson silkscreen. And this just has a traditional mahogany neck. So yeah, I can see why Gibson didn't decide to end up producing this thing. It's a little bit too goofy and out there, but it is definitely a historically significant piece. But now that we know a little bit more about this one, let's go ahead and compare it to a first year DC standard. If you want to learn more about this one, I do have a separate video for that, but let's take a look here. So with the headstock world, the DC standards definitely got more going on for them. These were officially Les Paul models. They got the Gibson mother of pearl logo. They got standard on the truss rod. These guys, again, they're just plain. You also have different tuners. You've got binding on the neck for both of them, but again, ebony fretboard versus rosewood on these. Here's a good look at the difference between the double cutaway shapes. This one's symmetrical, this one's not. And it's a little bit more rounded, not quite as flat as this guy right here. The prototype also only had 22 frets, whereas these guys got 24. But remember how I said this was kind of pointless because you can't reach the 23rd or 24th fret? They did that for a reason. It's because they needed the neck tenon space. They didn't want to route that out so the neck would just fall out. It needed something to grip onto. So on the prototypes, they did that neck tenon cover right there and put a mini humbucker in there to kind of get away with that. But they decided to go full humbucker mode on the production models and just added the 2 frets. That way they could get rid of the kind of clusteredness of the neck tenon cover. But in doing that for these, they kind of made the pickups look very crowded. Whereas this one, since it's a smaller pickup, it doesn't look as crowded and it doesn't feel as crowded. They decided to ditch all the confusing electronics. It's just a standard volume and tone on this one with a 3-way selector switch. Whereas this one, again, it kind of had the M3 design with fancy electronics. You still got the maple tops, but these ones were heavily figured, whereas this one's kind of a beautiful plain top. But both have the bridge and tailpiece set up. So these designs are definitely very different. It's kind of cool to see how this evolved into this. The only other main feature that kind of differs here is these guys ended up getting a comfort carve on the side, whereas this prototype did not. But a comfort design that these guys got that this one didn't is, since this was more of a flat back, they kind of angled it right there. You can see how it reflects the light differently. That is not true on the production runs. You can also see these kind of have a coffin-shaped back plate, whereas this one, it's just kind of triangular. So I'm definitely glad I purchased one of these DC standards to do this comparison because, you know, there's a lot different. So now that we know a little bit about this DC prototype, let's go ahead and throw it on the workbench and, you know, see how it was made. Looking inside this guitar has been quite an eye-opening experience. I'm not going to say this was expertly crafted. There's actually kind of a few very experimental things in here. So our neck mini humbucker here, it kind of looks like one of the Firebird styles. You've got your patent number still on the base plate here. It does have a gold cover, but most of that gold has worn off by now. And instead of having like a round mini humbucker ring, they've got this black flat plastic ring. Kind of similar to what a humbucker has, except for it's not raised up, it's just a flat piece of plastic. I'm guessing if this ever went to production, they probably would have done something a little bit more stylish. And here's something I've never seen on a humbucker before. There's like black tape surrounding it underneath the cover. I'm not really sure what that's all about, but you can just barely make out the Gibson USA branding on the base plate. But here's where things get really interesting in the construction of this thing. So underneath this tenon cover, you can see, well, obviously why it's called the tenon cover. It covers up the neck tenon. Well, this has to be the tightest neck joint I've ever seen. Usually there's like a small gap that you can feel. I mean, this has all been finished over. That's looking really good. The only thing that's kind of questionable here is there's this little gap in the binding right there. It almost looks like they just took some white out and tried to complete the binding look right there for some reason. But due to not having all the wood around here to support the neck, they did have to give it a long tenon. But what's different here between the DC standards is this is chambered out. So down here it's just a completely open cavity. There is no back to that. So this neck tenon, it's really hard to see. It's not actually secured to anything. So I'm not sure if that's really doing much of anything at all. It's just kind of acting like a short neck tenon within the wood that they left in place right there. It's kind of hard to illustrate that, but you see how I can put this light down underneath that? It's just kind of floating there. And then furthermore, this neck pickup is super tight. It's hard to get it back into place. And you can see where they just kind of chiseled away the wood right there after it was finished to help make it easier to fit in. This was just an experimental guitar. It wasn't ever meant to be sold so they could do things like this. You can also see where the glue seeped out when the top was being put on, as well as some down there. As far as the bridge goes, we've got a Nashville styled one. It's actually kind of one of the older looking ones here. This is the style that I associate with the very late 80s and very early 90s. It has made in Germany markings on both sides. If it's just on one, that's how you know it's kind of like a 70s and early 80s part. Another fun fact, at some point in time, it might have actually been at the factory. Somebody put this on technically backwards, but as long as it intonates, that's fine. But I'm going to leave it the way that it was set up with these saddles. Nothing too special going on with this tailpiece. I don't see the normal tooling mark I see on the back, so it's possible this was replaced at some point in time, or just, again, an experimental part. We've got our pickup selector switch here, which is only 3 positions, a master volume, master tone, and a 3-way mini toggle switch. This prototype has a 2-piece maple top, and as you can see in here, it's a mahogany body that's all chambered out. And then I was really surprised to see an ebony fretboard on this. That was kind of interesting. You've also got binding along the neck, and they did a great job on this one. I really like the way these inlays look too. Underneath the blank truss rod cover, you can see the truss rod channel here. Everything's looking good there. And they gave this one a Gibson silk screen. And I get a 1.67 inch nut width, which increases to 2.04 at the 12. First fret is rather skinny at 0.81 and tops off at 0.91 at the 12. And despite being experimental, they didn't change the scale length. It's still 24 3/4 inches. Moving on to the back here, just to show you again how experimental this thing was. The back plate's not even a 100% fit. You can see there's a little bit of a gap right there, but as we all know, I'm no better at making these things. But inside here is kind of interesting. It's hard to exactly show you, but what they've done is this whole thing is chambered out, except for a small block of wood. I would say it's probably about this large, just for the tailpiece and the bridge to be drilled into. Everything else, including underneath the pickup cavity routes, all the way around here, it's completely hollowed out. So it's a very lightweight guitar. Here you can see the 3-way toggle and the switch and the pots right here. At some point in time, somebody messed with the wiring in here. This is not factory stock, I can tell you that. There's some leftover capacitors left in the case. They say they were non-original. So I'm not sure if this is the original factory specification wiring or not, but hey, there's nothing really to compare it to, so this is the best we can do. Unfortunately, none of the pot codes are readable. This instrument uses a plastic output jack plate. You've got your regular style strap buttons, one down here, and then the interesting one right here on the horn, where some people will move it on an SG. They likely did that to combat neck dive. Now what I like about this mahogany neck is there's a couple of eyes in it. There's one right here, and then as you move up here, there's another one right underneath this tuner. I always like identifying wood grain features like that. Then you have this style of Gibson tuner, made in USA stamp. You have a 1992, 200 looks like 45th day of the year, and 461st in production. This example weighs 5 pounds, 14.2 ounces. All right, so a few issues that I have with this guitar is it's super neck divey. The way I fix that is I just attach a small amp to my strap, that way I can demo it. The other thing is, since this is completely hollowed out, whenever you have it like on a drive channel or something, you know how when you knock on a Les Paul or something, you can hear it? The strap buttons are squeaky because my strap is, rubbing against it, and that's also amplifying. And the other thing is, I'm not sure when this thing was rewired, if they didn't get it quite right, but you can kind of hear a grounding hum when you touch this metal thing. And continuing on with the whole chambered out thing, whenever you touch these knobs, you can hear it. So let's understand this tonally. In the neck pickup position, this 3-way toggle switch, it does nothing. It's the same thing all positions. I've never had a Firebird, but I'm guessing that's kind of what they sound like. It's got a very ceramicness to the tones. It's not quite what I'm used to when I have a mini humbucker. It kind of has a piezo chiminess to it. Now we'll go to the bridge pickup. As with most M3 layouts, they have a standby phase when this mini toggle is in the middle position. You can kind of use it for kill switch effects if you want. It's kind of hard to get the timing right, but it is possible. But it's mainly just for like a stutter. So kind of like a tremolo. But when the mini toggle is facing you, it is in a coil split mode. And facing away from you, it's in the full humbucker mode. And there's quite a huge difference between those sounds. Almost reminds me of like a Telecaster. Then moving on to the middle position, what I'm hearing out of this is when this is in the middle position, you've got both pickups on and it's just regular, you know, both pickups going. But when you flip it up, it splits this pickup and it puts them out of phase. But if you flip it all the way away from yourself, it's out of phase but without being split. You can always hear the out of phase when you do like a run up the neck. It's really quacky sounding. So that means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You get 6 different tones with this thing. But that's not bad for only having 2 pickups, right? guitar was made, some of its history, as well as how it sounds. I don't have to go over the condition of this one because it's not my guitar. This was the final one from the private build collection. I'm definitely happy that he shared this with us because it is an important piece of Gibson history. I don't think it's necessarily important to go over the condition of this one, but just for documentation's sake, this was appraised by Grun's Guitars back in 1998, when the standards came out. He put a value of $850 on it. It was just a few years ago that this showed up on like a Chicago pawn shop. They ended up selling it for around $4,000. Then it ended up in Florida with a guitar broker, and I think that is where the current owner got it from. It's not necessarily for sale, but it has been sold as mint condition many times, and I just want to kind of bust that myth. You definitely have a few light nicks and dings here. I don't know, maybe it happened in the possession of the current owner, but I know he's really good with how he handles his guitars. So I'm guessing these were just never really pointed out to him, and I'm guessing this instrument might have been dropped at some point in time. I'm not sure when you guys will be able to see this, but there's a lot of vertical finish checking stemming from the knobs. You can see it kind of from the screws. I mean, you kind of got to get it in the light just right for it to show up. But you've got the typical lines starting to form around the fretboard from where the binding truly ends and the neck begins. And why not blacklight it just for fun here real quick. So, thank you troglodytes for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed learning about this DC experimental prototype, and we will see you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care.